give a warm welcome to Julien Bayle from Aiven. Julien is a partner solution architect at Aiven, and he will share now with you the benefits of using database as a service on your cloud infrastructure.
Nice to meet you. I want you to do a conference which is not about like any technical point, but I will focus more about like a generic speech about database as a service. It will not be focused on anything about like specific on Exascale or Aiven at all, but more talking about the subject of database as a service in a general manner. I'm Julien Bayle. I really like open source. All my life I have tried to use only open source software, like even for the computer, Linux and everything. So that's like my mindset. And I'm really thinking that we have reached a point when we can do anything with open source software nowadays. In my life, I was architect, CTO, and I created 2 companies. And my position in Aiven right now is staff platform architect, meaning that my idea is to improve the platform in Aiven. And nice to meet you all. Happy to be with you this morning. So part of the session would be DBaaS, the second part would be to DBaaS provider. It will be like some best practices, but so I will here and a CTO. Like there are 2 of them, they create a new project. It could be a project in an enterprise. He wants to create a website to not working. I'm sorry. With PHP and MySQL to start the program. And the idea of the CTO is, okay, that's just an MVP, so I will do something simple. I will just create a virtual machine, and I will put everything on it using just like OS packages. So I would just install apt-get install, MySQL, and everything, and that's easy. I can start developing right now. So what he's doing is like he's doing self-managed database as a service here about MySQL. And the problem is like the setup seems to be only 1 minute, just giving a command. But over time, like this guy will add many stuff. He will add the backup, test the backup, add the update, test the update. Then he will have many other problems about scaling, about many stuff. Then there will be about security, and he will add some encryption. Then we need to manage certificate, and then many stuff. The problem with using self-managed is like people doesn't really understand how much time do they spend doing all of this, because they will do it over the time when the project will grow. And the idea is about maintenance. It's like they don't have time to do the maintenance well. So when you're doing self-managed, you are taking a risk. Because anytime you try to do something as perfect as you want, but the idea is like when you have to patch the system because there is a security fix that you should like just install, you don't have time this week, so you will do it next week, then next month. The idea of DBaaS, it's not only about managing it for you, it's removing the risk from you, and also improving like the efficiency of your team. The idea is having in 1 minute, not just a MySQL up and running, it's having a MySQL which is production grade. And when I say in production grade, I'm saying like, you can go production with that. You can scale, everything is perfect, everything is battle tested. And for the maintenance, everything is done for you. So the idea here about DBaaS, from my perspective, it's that you put your energy in something else. And in Aiven, we have like done some computation, going to the enterprise and saying, okay, how much time it would be useful for you so that you have the same setup as in Aiven, for example. And the result for MySQL, for example, is 500 hours just to do the setup. And every year, it would be 500 hours more every year just to manage your setup, testing that everything is ready, your disaster recovery works, your backup works, applying all the updates and everything, and just getting up to date with everything. So the idea about DBaaS is helping your team to focus on something else. When we look to big enterprise, like in my story, this is just a CEO and a CTO with one MySQL. But now let's look to a bigger company. We have an example in Aiven, is Decathlon, for example. And we have done a study with IDC study. And they go to them and they say, okay, just explain to us, what's the win in using Aiven services or database as a service in general? And explain, look to every time, all the consumption of the time, and this is the result. 80% reduction of staff time and time to deploy a new database. Because they know that when they create a new database, it's production ready. No question asked, nothing to test, nothing to worry about. And then the idea in this kind of company is like they can go faster because there is no risk. They are not afraid that like a team with like junior developers use database for production and mission critical stuff because they know that everything is well done by design. And that's really the idea. If I go back to my story, the CEO say, hey guy, where are you? What a time to market. And the CTO say, okay, we have done it, but we wanted to test if this could scale. And we realized that it cannot scale with just my PHP and MySQL. It's too hard to scale right now. So I want to use a new technology. I want to use Kubernetes. I will add Redis so that I can have a cache. And I will add like OpenSearch so that I will have a better search engine for my website. But we all know that over the time, a project gets more and more complex. So in your team, you will have a need of more and more specific skills. And each database, each technology means something different to manage it. And the idea, once again, about DBaaS is like, you don't have to be an expert of all your technology. You just get that out to somebody else. And everything is production grade, and everything is ready. Everything is ready. So the idea here is like, Kubernetes seems a good idea for like doing managed DBaaS. But that's not my opinion, to be honest with you. My problem right now, many people use Kubernetes, and they try to pull everything which is stateful inside Kubernetes. We have many solutions, and right now it could work. The only problem you would have is first, you need to select which one. There is multiple companies, multiple operators. What's the support? How do you test it? How do you feel that it works? And the idea with Kubernetes is like you have more failures than using VM. So right now, all the DBaaS providers, they just provide stateful services, so database, using virtual machine. And the reason why is like we don't like failures. When you use Kubernetes, the ratio of failures, disk failures, VM failures, nodes that just go away because the container seems like it wants to move you away, there is more errors. So this is harder to do. And right now, the operators, the problem is this one: compliance, security, backup, checking that everything works. How do you do it? That's not that easy. And you will spend a lot of time doing it. And the problem is like you need to test it, you need to reuse, you need to author that everything is working. Even if you get like an independent software vendor that provides you like a database operator to run everything on Kubernetes, how are you sure that everything is working with your clusters? And you have many clusters, all different. How do you test it? The idea of using DBaaS right now, even if you are using Kubernetes, is like put your VM using DBaaS in something else, and then you just connect to the database from Kubernetes, but you do not manage stateful services like Kubernetes. I think from my perspective, this is not like the best way to work right now. The other stuff about DBaaS is everything is done by design. You have all the audits, all the compliance, all the security stuff offered and proposed and completely sure. And it doesn't depend on the way you manage your cluster, on the provider of your Kubernetes or the different instances. So we are 12 months later, we go back to our characters, and the CEO say, hey, that works, it scales. 30% month over month growth, less. We have many customers, they want more from us. But the problem in the reality is like all the teams. The CTO is using Kubernetes, it's scaling, so most of the time of the team is spent on what? Automation, checking the reliability, being sure that the business goes without no any outage. And the problem is like that's not what the CEO wants. The CEO, he wants more features for the customers so that it continues to grow. But the CTO cannot deliver because right now he wants everything to be sure. And all the automation, all the scripts, everything is done by himself. So we need to test and be sure of that because it's all about security and reliability on his side. Steve Jobs said one time, like, focusing is about saying no. And I think none of you want to create a company which is managing database. In reality, you are doing business, and we all know that. The idea of the DBaaS provider is to provide you a solution so that you do not become a company that manages database. Create a lot of scripts to do the backup, to do the availability, and everything like that. But it's never too late. And that's, I think, the most important point of my presentation. The CEO say, okay, but can we stop that? Can we just use DBaaS? And the CTO say, yeah, perhaps, I agreed. Let's check that. So we have checked that in Aiven. The same story with many customers of us, many enterprise. And when we go back to them and we do like an audit with IDC here, the idea is the same. Even if you change from self-manage to managed by a provider, you have a very good payback. The idea is like, when you will be moving, that's a cost. It's okay, it's a cost. You will migrate your data, everything. But then, on average, for enterprise customers, it's 5-month payback. And then if you look to 3 years, you are like the first year you pay the migration and everything, and you will go like, you will pay more. To be honest, database as a service will cost you more, okay? Then you will pay the migration. But what happens? It's like you will free up resources. These resources are database, like database administrator or so on. They will focus on the queries, the optimization, because they will have more time to that, to like improve the way you do the queries, to improve the way you use the database. And over the second year and the third year, all this optimization done by the free up resources in your company, that will allow you to scale down the resources. And then you will spend less money. So over 3 years, the ROI, return of interest, is more than 300%. And right now, this is what we can see with like all our customers. And this is what is the ground of the success of Exascale or Aiven. It's like over 3 years, it's a big win for everybody. So as a conclusion of the first part of this presentation, I would say just, you don't need databases for your project. First, what you need is selecting the right DBaaS provider for your project or your company. And that's really from day 0. I think right now, we do not have like, the question is not to be asked. It's like day 0, you start even a development, even something like a test, even an MVP. I think it's better to start with database as a service. So the second part is like, okay, so what's the right service provider for my DBaaS? Is Exascale? Is something else? There is many. And my idea is like, how do you select it? How do you be confident in what you select? And I will take some subject. The first one is recovery point objective. And that's really the first question you should ask yourself. In your project, how much data are you ready to lose? And most of the time, people just don't answer really this question. Some providers can provide 0, no data loss. Some others cannot. And honestly, most of you are thinking that you cannot lose any data. But in the reality, the way you implement your solution, you will lose some data. To answer the question is that if you're ready to lose 1 day, then you can do something really simple. You do a daily backup, and when you have like a problem, you just take back the backup. This is really easy. This is what everybody's doing. When you go to the DBaaS provider, they do not provide you a 1-day recovery point objective. They provide you only some minutes or a 0. And that is why you're searching for this kind of provider. Because when you work with them, they will provide you the best service with a very complex architecture, but everything managed for you. The second question is recovery time objective. okay, the database has an outage. How much time do you accept that your database stays down? Once again, the difference between your team and a DBaaS provider, it's like the DBaaS provider support all your services, all the week, all the time zone in the world, 24 hours a day, with a real team. Not a team that we call at night and they say, hey, we have a problem on the database, please wake up. No, no. We have people all around the world ready to save your database so that we can provide you a recovery time objective, which is like about some minutes. And this is completely different by doing it by yourself. So once again, recovery time objective, there is an impact on the architecture. If you want something which is near zero, then you will need a very complex architecture. Could be something like high available cluster, multi-region, with an auto retry, and everything. So this is what DBaaS are providing you. And as I can see, any project over the time, we are going to zero. Everybody wants to go to zero because the project becomes mission critical, very important in the organization. You have more users, more customers, then you are not accepting a 1 day for these two metrics. We all understand that the zero is the most expensive. So in many companies, the question is about money. But from my perspective, the question is not really about money. The question is about, does my DBaaS provider can do it? And I will answer you honestly. They cannot most of the time. Let's say this John Doe provider. It just can provide you 5 minutes for recovery point objective, like how much data are you ready to lose 5 minutes. It cannot do less. It's impossible because it doesn't have the architecture to do it. And about recovery time objective, it's 15 minutes because it's not fully automated. So there is a part of human, and the time for the human to get and check that everything is okay is 15 minutes. So the idea is provider like Aiven, we are trying to provide you a 0 and 0. Right now, we are reaching 0 for RPO, and our reach is about 1 minute for ATO in average. So that's really the idea. The idea of selecting a DBaaS provider is at the end, I know it's a little bit more expensive, but when you have a problem, that's a huge difference. Then you have SLO and SLA. To be honest, service level objective could be, for example, I want 4.9 reliability. So I want only minutes per year of outage. And then you have the SLA, the contract, the agreement, when it is said, okay, if I do not respect my target SLO, I will pay you some money. But the reality of this point is how much money? You have some DBaaS provider, they say, okay, we are very good. But if there is a problem, they will just pay you some euros. So for you, big impact on your business, and they will pay you a check. Yeah, this is 1,000 euro, for example. But the impact for your business could be millions. Or even your company or your project could be destroyed. Your customer trust could be lost. So the question is how serious is the company? How much are they ready to compensate you? And this is really a question for you. It's a question about business. If my database is out of service for 1 hour, my impact is 10,000. How much my provider is ready to pay me back if this is a huge problem? And I think this in the negotiation is something that people doesn't really take seriously, because this is the serious part. There are other business requirements, but we all know them all about. It's about compliance, laws, regulation, data locality, having an exit strategy, having some backup option, for example, being able to have point-in-time restore. But this is also business requirements. And this second part of the presentation is that explaining that selecting a DBaaS provider, this is not about a technical choice. It could be, but most of the time, it's a business decision based on business requirements. And when you select your DBaaS provider, first, just accept that this is about business. Now, let's look at some best practice about using DBaaS, but not only DBaaS, but open source DBaaS, and what it is open source DBaaS. Because open source is a buzzword, everybody is using it, but right now in the world of DBaaS provider, not everything is really the same open source. This is not really equivalent. People tell you this is PostgreSQL, but are you sure this is the same PostgreSQL as you would install on your computer? I will not be as sure as you. So nowadays, nearly more than 70% of the new projects are using open source database. But which kind of open source database? If you install the database on your computer, that's vanilla open source, meaning you have the same as like you can get on GitHub or anything. This is the classic one, the vanilla, no flavor. This is not customized, the plugins are not customized, the service is not customized. But most of the time, what DBaaS provider provides is a forked version, a modified version of the database. And sometimes you can have access to it, sometimes you cannot. It's even not released. They say, this is PostgreSQL, this is Cassandra, this is Redis. Yeah, but this is a modified version. Then what? How are you sure that this is not creating bugs? How are you sure that there will not be a divergence? How are you sure that what they are releasing is exactly what they are using? You cannot be sure. And honestly, I have seen many DBaaS providers in my life, and I have selected to work at Aiven because we want to stay on vanilla open source. And honestly, this is the hardest part. Because when you have a bug, and you are using a fork version, you just fix your fork version. If you have a bug and you use vanilla open source, then you should fix the bug in the open source community. And you need to be accepted, reviewed by everybody. But then what's the difference for you? You go to the DBaaS provider, you have a problem. He solved your problem. But the problem is only solved on the fork version. Then you have an exit strategy. You want to go back to another DBaaS provider. Same code, but the bug is not fixed there. So you cannot leave, because the reality of the fork version is like nobody take the fix and move it back to the vanilla version. Some providers play the open source game. They stay on the vanilla, they fix the vanilla. Some others just do a fork and fix their own version for their own customers. That's not exactly the same. The second is, I would say, not really open source approved by the Open Standard Initiative. A real open source, nobody has any control, there is no usage limitation. But most of the time, we know like the story about Elastic, for example, like they're using not really open source, but for some server side license. And the idea is like, I am the only one that can manage the service. So you can install the service on your server yourself. You can give like it to be managed by me, but nobody else can manage the service. That's the case of MongoDB, for example. That's the case of Elastic, for example. So they're telling you, yeah, you can go anywhere, but that's not true, because the reality is like, this is not open source. Everything is controlled by one company. She decides who can provide database as a service, manage services. They say, you can, you cannot, you have to pay. So if they want to change the price sometime, they say, okay, let's double the price. From your perspective, you say, okay, I have many providers that can provide that. But the reality is like everybody's paying back to that company so that they can provide you managed services. So if they change the price, everybody will change the price. This is more than a lock-in. This is completely false open source. This is not the idea. This is not the good mindset. And the problem is like they control who can provide managed services, and they control the code. If they do not want your fix, they don't approve your fix. So for a company like Aiven, we want to fix it, impossible. Then we say, okay, we don't want a free patch. And you cannot use a fork version to have managed services for your customers. So just understand that there is two different kinds of open source. And in this diagram, I want to explain why vanilla is not like the first selection of the people. I think we all understand. The idea of this company is being faster on innovation. So they will provide new features before the others. You will have like great stuff. But how fast? 6 months, 1 year before it would be available on vanilla? And at the price of what? At the price of some lock-in. So the real idea when you select a database is like, is this feature is okay for you that you will completely use your power to negotiate, to go somewhere else? Sometimes it's true, because you really need that. It's impossible for you to achieve your requirements without this feature. But my point is like, most of the time, using vanilla open source is okay, because your exit strategy would be you can go anywhere, and you can go back to on-premise, you can go back to any cloud, and remember, you can go back self-managing if you want. Because at some point, if you decide, you can. Some DBaaS providers allow you to go back to managing yourself. Some others provide such features, fixes, that you will never be able to go back to your own system. So the CTO agreed, OK, let's use managed database. And the CEO answered, OK, I have that for you. This is what I want. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any question, I'm here for you.